Chinese Christians Fight for Freedom. We've got Bob Fu with us. Bob Fu has a book called God's Double Agent, and Bob Fu is a former dissident and pastor of an illegal underground church in China. He and his wife Heidi escaped prison, fled to the United States as refugees in 1997. He is a distinguished professor of religion and public policy at Midwest University and a research PhD candidate as well. And we could say a whole lot more.
Research what?
Research PhD candidate.
Oh,
at Durham.
PhD candidate.
PhD candidate at Durham University. And so we're so excited to hear his story today. Bob Fu, welcome to today's Issues.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Bob. I'm Tim.
Hi, Tim.
With John here.
Hi, John.
So
Hi.
We should be able to remember each other's names.
Pretty common.
Yeah, Bob, Tim, and John.
That's common.
We're going to make it simple today. Bob, we've been looking forward to having you on our program. Your book is called God's Double Agent, the true story of a Chinese Christian's fight for freedom. Says Eric Metaxas of the Colson Center that this book is, quote, impossible to put down. It's so riveting. So, Bob, take us back and tell us where we need to start in the story of your life, which is in this book.
Yes, Jim, I just want to maybe start with explanation why I'm called God's Double Agent. It happened when I was teaching English as a full-time faculty in the Chinese Communist Party school in Beijing. That was my daytime job, and at the same time I was ministering to the underground church, outreaching to the campus university students with the gospel in the evening and the weekend. So by the end of each month, I got a full-time paycheck from the Communist Party as my missionary fund. I think that's God's humor. That's why I'm called God's Double Agent.
Okay. Well, so you grew up obviously in China, and tell us about that. Where in China?
Yeah, I was raised and grew up in northeast of China, as a province called Shandong Province. And my mom was a beggar before she met me with my father, and my father was a disabled man. And being raised in that kind of a humble, family, I was always thinking to make a change, yearning for equality and justice. And it was that kind of experience really initially made me feel in China the only meaningful change to come was to become a big potato, become a political leader. And that's how I involved the Tiananmen Students Movement in 1989. Later on, of course, a massacre happened. And I was also taken revenge by the Communist Party, and even met with betrayal by my close friends, including the president of the university where I was studying. And then during that hard time, I was thinking of committing a suicide bomb campaign to kill my enemies and myself because I felt I was hopeless. If I could not even change my friends, how could I change, the nation and my people? So, but during that time of crisis, God rescued me by me reading a biography of Chinese pastor. It's called a biography of Pastor Xi Shengmo. It was smuggled in by my American English teacher. Who was, of course, missionaries, undercover missionaries, in the English department where I was studying, and that story really convicted me and converted me to follow Christ and become a new creation in Jesus Christ. And so that's my experience of, from a Tiananmen student leader, a democracy activist, to a follower of Jesus and a minister of the underground house church in China.
So, Bob, tell us how you connected or began to work with the underground church in China. You now love the Lord. You became a new creation. And how did you begin to connect with the underground church? And tell us about that.
Yes, John, when I was a new believer, at the time I really didn't know there was a above the ground church, underground church. I was just, the whole world was sort of changed in front of me after I was led with the prayer by our American teacher. And I started actually going to a three-self patriotic movement, government-sanctioned, registered church, and then not very soon, I was talked by the public security officer and said, as a university student, you cannot go to church. You are trained for this as the successors of the communism and socialism, and were forbidden to have any religious belief, especially believe Christianity. So that made me realize you can't be a real, faithful follower of Jesus if you go to the government-sanctioned church and you're not even allowed to go there. So then I started to join the fellowship of the underground, the independent house church movement, and eventually met a lot of brothers and sisters who spent years in prison, and including the one who married my wife and I, Pastor Alan Yuan, who spent almost 23 years imprisonment for his faith and refusal to join the government-sanctioned the Communist Party church. And as I was told by these the persecuted faithfuls, they always shared their experience with a smile, basically telling me, if you want to be a faithful follower of Jesus Christ in China, the first theological course you need to take is called prison theology. So my wife and I always kept that in mind, that we want to be a faithful servant of the Lord, and sometimes we had little faith, so we asked the Lord to give us 3 years so that we can serve you before we taste the prison theology. And it did happen that way. So in 1996, both my wife and I were imprisoned.
We're talking to Bob Fu, F.U., and he is the author of the book God's Double Agent, The True Story of Chinese Christians' Fight for Freedom. And the Baker Books is the publisher. Bob, 1990, how old are you today, by the way?
I'm 46 this year.
Okay, so you were arrested in 96, what'd you say?
Yes.
Okay, so I can't figure up the math, but tell me, how old were you when you got sent to prison?
You mean how?
In your 20s.
I was born in 68, so 96 is 28.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, what did they come... When you were first arrested and sent to prison, who came and got you? Mm-hmm. How were you charged? And then where were you sent? And tell us how that whole episode came down.
Yes, I was teaching in the Communist Party school, and one day in May 1996, I got a phone call after I finished one session of teaching that the Beijing Public Security Bureau official want to talk to me, and suddenly I realized the time has come to take the prison theology. So I actually knelt down with my wife Heidi. We prayed, and I just gave her some important items, including the phone book, because with sensitive information there, for her to keep. And when I was on the way to meet with the public security officers on the step of the apartment, a group of Chinese security police and security agents were already on their way to our apartment. And that after hours of search and make our apartment basically upside down, every corner was searched, and every items and books and videos related to Christian faith, our wedding album, wedding videos were all confiscated. And Heidi and I were both taken to the detention center that very day, the very night. So we were thrown into jail.
What did they charge you with?
The charge filed on the paper is called illegal religious activities. So we were suspected for engaging illegal religious activities.
So like evangelism or proselytizing Christianity? That's
yes.
what they... Okay.
That's basically, the literal translation of the charge is illegal evangelism.
Okay.
You can't hold Bible study group at your home without your permission, without government permission. Of course, I was also conducting underground Bible school in the suburb of Beijing.
Bob, why do you think, I know this is a big question perhaps, and we don't have a long time to get into it, but why do you think the Chinese Communist government cares about whether you're having a Bible study or not, or you're sharing your faith? What is the threat to the communist government that they would go so far as to imprison people and make it illegal?
I think you know this better. That spiritually, it's about really, as Gospel of John, chapter 1 says, it's the darkness and light. And if you're light, the darkness not only would not leave you alone, they hate the light. And of course, the nature of communism, in China especially, is control. And anything, and any group or gathering that is not seen as under the absolute control of the Chinese Communist Party is perceived as a political threat. And nowadays, you can't even, have a banquet. Those church leaders or political dissidents, they can't even have a banquet with 3 or 4 people together. They would be harassed. So that, I think, is the nature of the dictatorship and tyranny. So they just don't want people to have the freedom of worship and freedom of assembly.
So it's about controlling, obviously communism is all about that, controlling people. So anything that they don't control, they consider to be a potential political threat, even though it's that's the way they view it.
That's correct. They call it stability maintenance. And ironically, the budget and the money that has been spent for the so-called stability maintenance, social stability maintenance, has already been more than the defense budget in China.
Gotcha. We're talking to Bob Fu, and his book is called God's Double Agent, The True Story of a Chinese Christian's Fight for Freedom. How long were you in prison for your faith in China?
We were both there for a short time compared to our predecessors. And 2 months we were imprisoned in a Beijing prison.
You and who else?
And my wife.
And your wife,
wow,
yeah. Were you separated?
Yes, we were separated throughout the whole time. She was with other female criminals, and I was put in a prison cell with drug dealers and other political prisoners.
How did you get out?
It was really answered prayer, and we know that many had been praying and and the U.S. and the world media had reported and pressure